Hello, welcome to this Cambridge Chem webinar. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the UK today. The title of today's webinar is the Cambridge Wellbeing Check. I'm just going to go through some housekeeping before we get started. Please note that your microphones are all muted. We cannot hear any members of the audience, and this is so that the sound quality remains high. If you would like to ask questions, please post them in the questions box, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. If we don't answer your question, we will send out any additional questions and answers via email. You'll receive a certificate of attendance sent to your email inbox 1 hour after the webinar, and you will receive a copy of the webinar recording and the slides sent by email next week. It might be nice if you'd like to use the questions box to tell us where you're joining from today. A little bit about Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring, otherwise known as CHEM. We've been working with schools for over 30 years in over 100 countries. We're known for evidence-based approach to formative assessments. We work with schools, ministries and associations all over the world. In 2019, we became part of the University of Cambridge, and we help teachers turn data into knowledge. We try to bridge the gap between research and practice, and we provide evidence to support good decision-making. I'm now going to hand you over to Mark Frazer, who will be taking you through our wellbeing webinar.
Thank you, Caroline. Welcome along, everybody, this afternoon. And over the next 30 minutes, as Caroline said, we're going to be telling you a little bit about the Cambridge Wellbeing Check and a little bit about more broadly about what wellbeing is and what you can do to improve wellbeing for your students in your school. Just before we start, just a little bit about myself. I've been at Chem for about 7 years now, and I am a former teacher and head teacher of primary schools up in the northeast of England. And my job title is Teaching and Learning Lead. So I'm here really to talk about the assessment itself and a little bit of the background and the research that led us to develop this new product. I've got 5 parts to my presentation this afternoon. So just very quickly, what's wellbeing? Why is it important? Why should we assess well-being, the wellbeing check itself, and then a few sort of reflections as to what I might do if I was back in school having to improve well-being for my students. So when I was thinking about putting these slides together, and you think about everything that's gone on in the last couple of years, it was interesting to see this report again. So this is an OECD report from, take note of the date, March 2020, and it's quite an optimistic report in many ways. In many ways, life's getting better. The good news is, life expectancy is going up, and despite the financial crisis of, last decade, people are living longer, safer lives. To be fair to it, it does point out that there are, as it says, storm clouds gathering on the horizon. That said, I don't think many of us could have foreseen the full sort of magnitude of what was coming. We've had the pandemic, we've got war on our doorstep in Europe, deepening environmental worries, the cost of living crisis, fuel poverty. My goodness, what next? Now, these are not necessarily things that affect young people directly, but they certainly, as we know, young people are sponges who absorb anxiety from around them. And if we as adults are worried, chances are young people are going to be worried as well. And people are just more anxious about things, far more than they were perhaps 2 years ago. But if one good thing has come out of the recent past, it's perhaps that well-being, personal well-being, is more prominent now than it ever has been. But what do we mean by well-being? So let's have a look at our first question here. And probably just skip past that, Caroline, onto the slide afterwards. Thanks. So especially we're thinking about well-being in the context of school or college. I came across this data very recently. This is from a recently published paper from the Children's Society, taken from a study called the British Household Panel Survey, which has been running for a number of years and looks at what people are feeling in about 5,000 households across the UK. And interestingly, when you look at how young people are feeling in terms of their family life, nothing really has changed over the last decade. However, if you see other aspects of the survey, and there are all sorts of different measures from satisfaction with your appearance and your friends and everything, but life as a whole is definitely on a downward trajectory. Really sad news. School, similarly, downward trajectory, but a little bit more erratic. So it's data like this and other evidence that we've seen that's got us thinking when we've been developing our wellbeing check. Because that data is not ours, but it paints a picture of generally what is happening within our society. A few years ago, some of our colleagues in the Faculty of Education, Ros McClelland and Susan Stewart, carried out a bit of work focusing on young people's well-being in school. And their paper argues that, as educators, it's very important for us to investigate well-being in the school context, because there are lots of studies out there which have even things like the Good Childhood Index is a mixed bag of measures, and satisfaction with school life is about 9th on the list of things that they're looking at. So we've seen this piece of work and we thought, right, what can we do to focus the attention on the actual experience young people have when they are in school itself? Because if we know that, we can understand, more importantly, what can be changed and allow young people to flourish. The model we've developed is based on the research I've just mentioned there, and we define well-being as being how individuals feel and function in a learning environment. We then subdivide that into 4 areas of well-being, which are described here. So we've got life satisfaction, negative emotions, interpersonal well-being, and competence well-being. So we're looking right across a range of feelings and functions and how students think about how these change when they're in school or college. Now, this will show us that well-being is a subjective psychological state. So that means it can change, from month to month or even day to day. It also changes from one context to another. Students' well-being, as we've seen from the graphs, may be high at home, but low in school. And because well-being is a psychological state, 2 children in identical material or physical circumstances might experience very different levels of well-being. So one child may feel happier than another. Despite this, we have no way of knowing, how one child is affected from another, but there is a way of finding out, and perhaps we would suggest that's just by asking the children about it. So why is it important? Why is well-being important in schools? And why should teachers and educators take notice of it? And this is one of my central messages today. Well-being is essential to academic success. Better well-being is linked with some forms of motivation. So students wanting to learn and make progress is essential for them to do that. They need to be invested in it. The other side of that same coin is that students with lower levels of well-being are far more likely to truant, to skip school, not to attend. And as we know, non-attendance is a real red flag, and students who are not coming to school, probably not learning, and they're on a downward spiral. So we need to address problems like that. So further evidence which shows that well-being is linked to academic performance comes from 2 of our colleagues in Cambridge. We've got doctors Irenka Suto and Tom Benton, who have looked at a wide range of literature and other studies, and have seen that there is a link in many studies between well-being and educational performance. Interestingly, as a former school leader, this is the thing that leaps out to me, is because I think you can kind of, the first point is fairly sort of common sense, self-evident, but the second point, having a whole school approach to well-being entertainment and how that is implemented is key to ensuring that students in your setting are well supported, are being monitored, and can be helped if they show a need for that. So why should we assess well-being in schools? I suppose you could say, why should we assess anything? Why should we assess geography, history, maths, science? It's one of those things that we do constantly in school on a very formal or informal basis, constantly. But if you measure something or assess it, you obtain better information about it and increase your understanding. So, as with all of those other subject areas I've mentioned, this is true of well-being. Our new Wellbeing Check has these fairly important uses. It will allow you to teach and explore well-being with students because it comes with some support materials we'll talk about in a little while. It allows you to evaluate the well-being of groups of students or individual students, and if you use the Wellbeing Check more than once, you can kind of look at the difference between the first time you did it and subsequent times, and possibly evaluate the impact of any interventions you put into place. So a little bit about the check itself. It's a digital system, so it runs on a PC, a tablet, laptop. It's automated, so there is no marking. There's no paperwork for teachers. It's quick and easy to set up and to use. It's fairly short. It only consists of 22 targeted questions. It's flexible. You can use this to fit in around lessons and various times of the school day or even the school year. And if you subscribe to this service, you can use it as many times within the year as you need. So here are 2 example questions. So very simple, what we'd call a like-it scale, 5 options. So really basic questions. So these are questions that we think are useful for children of any age. They're very clear, very simple, confusing. We just do not want to kind of trip students up. So these are really, really simple, particularly if students have English as an additional language. We've just tried to make the language just as basic and as simple as possible. We've also got a couple of kind of common sense checks as well. As you can see here, we're going to ask things like, when I'm at school, I feel happy, and the student would respond there. But also, we'd ask them, do you feel sad at any time as well? And again, when you're looking through your data, this kind of just acts as a bit of a safety net, just to check that somebody hasn't just kind of clicked through and they've given the same response for everything, because we would think you can't really be simultaneously happy and sad. This is just a little graphic which just shows that one of the sections, so negative feelings, is scored the opposite way around to positive feelings. So when you see some of the reports in a little while, this might make a bit more sense. But generally for the 3 positive feeling sections, 1 is low, 5 is high, and the reverse is true for the negative emotions section. So the reports are, like the questionnaire, we hope, very simple and easy to understand. A series of reports providing detailed feedback on individual learners' responses, that's at a group and school level, as well as the individual level. And some of the reports are designed for sharing with students, others are confidential and should be restricted to school staff. So here are a few examples, and I'm going to go through these quite quickly because there are about 13 in total. So as always, if you'd like to know more, please do contact us, and we'll happily chat through them at length. So the approach was to provide data in a very, very simplified form. So there's different ways of doing it, which you'll see as we go through. Tick boxes to start with. I apologize, this may be small on your screen, but again, we can provide you with larger images if you'd like to get in touch. But you don't need to read the information necessarily, but just understand that we've got the questions down the left-hand side, and for an individual student, the teacher is able to see how that student responded. When we do have extremely sort of low, sort of negative responses, we do subtly highlight those. It's like a pink shading with the red tick, as you can see there. We show students' responses as well in a graphical form like this. So for each section, so I said there are 22 questions spread out across 4 sections. We've got a summary for each section here. So we've got the competence well-being, the interpersonal well-being, life satisfaction, negative emotions. And here, I mean, this is dummy data here, but you can see for this student, interesting point to note, you can see it stands out, it's red flagged here that they're feeling quite positive in most sections, but there is something going on here. They've got a very low score within the negative emotions strand. So again, this is not diagnosing anything. We're not clinicians. This is just shining a spotlight on a potential problem, which should just open the door for future conversations with a student. So we're trying to just quickly and effectively reveal any areas where there may be concern. So the class, you can see you've got a class list. You would have a full list of students on this one, and this is a group overview. This is a little bit more numerical for teachers who want to analyze that data in a little bit more detail. You can see the average scores, the average responses in each of the sections for each of the students there. We split into male and female, and coming soon, we think there is a function there to have other categories as well. Just we recognize that's an increasingly relevant need in many settings. There we are, color-coded, that you can break down and see at a glance how each of the questions has been responded by the group. Amber, middle of the road, fairly neutral responses, green, positive, but as you can see on the bottom row there, about 20% of students have responded quite negatively to this one. I feel I'm doing well. 20%, a fifth of your group here is feeling negative about how they're doing. So again, this is not explaining why, but it's pointing towards a discussion that needs to happen. Again, we've seen a few of these, but this is a group of students showing the 4 areas of learning. But this is fairly anonymized down to the class level, and this is to be used in conjunction with one of the lesson plans that you can, as a class, once you've done the wellbeing check, you can look to see as a group, how are we feeling, and maybe you think about what we could do to help each other, what you could do as teachers, what support students need. But again, it's highlighting sort of anomalies and discrepancies, and we think that's just useful for you to discuss at length, either in a special wellbeing lesson or PSED or tutorial groups, or however you structure things in your school. This is, again, for students themselves, but this is an individual picture. You can see we've taken out the numerical data here, and this is purely descriptive. So we feel we can, this is safe to provide to students once they've been, they've had we wouldn't give this to a student cold, but to be, presented with this as part of the overall experience, and to be, have this explained that this is just a snapshot view. This is what you reported you were feeling like. Here's some descriptors. If you don't feel this is accurate, again, as a student, talk to us. We can have a conversation about this. But the fact that is, there is no numerical data there, we think would sort of prevent any kind of unwarranted and invalid sort of comparison of data between students. So we're just minimizing the impact, because as always with any kind of chem product, we would always say, this is a snapshot view, one point in time, so take it, proportionally and use it alongside other sources of evidence. Next slide, please. This final one in the reporting section here, this, again, I don't pretend you can read this, but in the resources, we've got a table like this, which lists all the reports, which explains what's in them. And then as you can see, the little tick box grid there, that explains how you may choose to use these reports from a school leadership point of view, classroom point of view as a teacher, and how you may provide these to students themselves. As mentioned a few moments ago, we do have some lesson plans which come along with the package, and they're broken down, as you can see here, lower primary, upper primary, lower secondary, upper secondary. Coming soon, we'll have 16 to 18-year-old plan as well. They're quite lengthy, detailed documents, so you can either use them almost as a script, but a lot of teachers do. Certainly thinking about when I was in the classroom, I cherry-picked from things like this. I'd have a look through and decide what was useful, what could I take from this, what would suit my class. You've got, if you're doing this with more than one class, as we know, no 2 groups of students are the same, so you might just want to adjust as you work. But again, quite a lot of detail there in terms of the rationale behind wellbeing lessons, some activities, and it's generally in 2 parts. So there's an introductory lesson, and then the students would following that, take the Wellbeing Check, and then you can do the follow-up work talking about what the results mean for you and for the group, and what we can do for individuals and students, the student body as a whole, in sort of more general terms. I think we've got 3 ways, as you can see coming up here, of providing you with guidance and support. It's the documentation that comes with the package. You've got access to Chem customer support team, via phone and email, and there's the online support hub. And moving on, final section here is about what you can do if you're in school. How can you improve well-being? So just thinking about some of the documents that are out there at the moment. As we know, the .gov.uk website is absolutely loaded with all sorts of documentation, thousands of documents, but I've just picked out 2 which I might just steer you to here. They are firstly this one, promoting well-being in school for children and young people. And this is a whole school or college approach. So this is quite a nice document if you are thinking about, okay, we haven't got a process in place, what can we do? And I like the model here because you've got, as you'll see shortly, 8 principles, and it points out, in the introduction, that things are changing, and not in a good way for children and young people. The survey in 2020 there, 16%. It's 1 in 6 of our children between the ages of 5 and 16 have a probable mental health disorder, an increase from the previous year. Note the date 2020. I am fairly confident that if we had the data rerun, as I showed you in the slide earlier on with the 3 graphs next to each other, things have probably continued on a downward trajectory. Undoubtedly, the coronavirus pandemic and everything else that's gone with it has had a negative impact. So it's, as a school, what are we doing about this? As a college, what can you do to help your young people? And the model I referred to on the first bullet point, if we go to the next slide, you can see it's this handy diagram which you can look at. Again, 8 principles. And the ones I've ringed there in red, I think that's perhaps where the Cambridge Wellbeing Check may be able to help. We can provide you with support for the curriculum, teaching and learning side of things to promote resilience, enable student voice in an anonymous and discreet and sensitive way, and to identify the impact of anything that you put in place. So again, I think we can kind of complement that model. Next document on the next slide is again some guidance that's been around for a few years, so pre-pandemic, but basically, it's common sense and points out, schools have a central role to play. I think, thinking back to when I was in school, students were on the premises for about 14% of their year. What's going on in the other 86% of the year? So we need to kind of control the things we can control. So we need to do that in a very efficient and careful way. So having clear systems and processes, and having that positive culture ethos and the supportive environment, that's central to everything that goes on in terms of supporting pupil well-being, but also staff well-being. To be fair, this presentation isn't about staff well-being, but again, we should never ever forget about the adults in school. If they're not in a good place, how can we expect our students to be adequately supported? Again, unless you've got a magnifying glass, you're not going to be able to read this, but this is from the same document. And I just wanted to pick out this paragraph here that I've zoomed in on, just because in the vast majority of cases, school staff are not mental health experts. We are generalists. Some may have come across from the medical world into school, but they are a minority, I'm sure. So teachers, support assistants, school leaders, everybody in the school community needs to be invested in this. And I used to think, I had a list of people who all often are overlooked, but the caretaker, the school cleaning staff, the crossing patrol, the kitchen staff, all of these people, as a head teacher, I relied on just because they saw this side of school life that I didn't see. And quite often, I mean, the crossing patrol person outside the school in particular was a chap who basically spoke to pretty much every child, their parents, the passers-by in the street on a daily basis. And they were central to this. So when I say school staff, I'm talking about everybody in the community. And we're not specialists, so what can we do? So if we look at the next slide, as part of our package of support, we can direct you to some resources. We've got a leaflet on its way, but here's one that we really like the look of, the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families. There is a raft of evidence-based practice on here, which can be used for teachers, school leaders, parents, students, everybody. Really nicely presented. We've got no formal connection with the Anna Freud Centre, but we really like the look of what they're doing. And again, just an example of what is out there and is freely available. Also, our within sort of Cambridge, if you're part of the Cambridge world, the Cambridge International world, we've got a wealth of resources there, again, for support for mental health and well-being. And the second document there, some really nice sort of introductory material, brilliant for staff development, and freely available to anybody who's part of the Cambridge family. Again, if you want to know more about that, contact us and we'll happily chat to you about that. And then finally, what can we do? What can teachers do? And I think we would all hope, what can support staff do? All adults in school. And I think it's just having ensured that every student has at least one strong, positive, supportive, appropriate professional relationship with an adult. There's absolutely nothing worse than when you haven't got somebody to talk to. So just make sure that the door is open for everybody in your school, and perhaps use our system or another system like it to monitor your students' well-being on a regular basis, and just take that holistic, systematic and unified view of monitoring well-being. So thank you very, very much for listening. I've gone through that quite quickly. As we've said earlier on, if you want to find out more, please do contact us. You can do that by going to the KEM website here and following the links to Wellbeing. And if you're interested in finding out more about the Wellbeing Check itself, there is a way of subscribing there as well. And Caroline and I will try and answer some of your questions. And there are also, you'll get some of the slides after the end, and you can see if you want to dig into the research a little bit more, in a little bit more detail, we've got some references there for you, some select references from some of the things I have referred to this afternoon. So thanks very much, Caroline. And thank you very much for everybody who has been listening. And again, if you've got a bit of time, please stick around and we'll do our best to answer some of your questions now. If there are too many, we will sort of come up with a list of responses, and they will come out to you in the near future. So thank you very much.